TJ, there was one thing I wanted to cover with you because this Aaron Rodgers-Ryan Clark thing just keeps going on and on and on, and people are fascinated by it, and I'm a bit fascinated by it, the whole Pat McAfee versus everybody at ESPN. And so Stephen A. Smith had some comments on his, I believe, podcast where he somewhat seemed to threaten Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers and Ryan Clark have been going back and forth. Pat McAfee is certainly on Aaron Rodgers' side. We've speculated that, no, you got this feud going on at ESPN between the McAfee camp and the Stephen A. Smith camp. Ryan Clark obviously on Team Stephen A. Aaron Rodgers clearly on Team Pat McAfee. Here's Stephen A. Smith chiming in with sounds like kind of a threat towards Aaron Rodgers. Let's play the clip.
Going after Ryan Clark, that ain't going to do much for you. That ain't going to do much for you. Ryan Clark and I have gone at each other in the past. You don't have a platform every day like I do. You don't want to go at Ryan Clark. That is not a winnable situation for you, Aaron Rodgers. In fact, it's almost as bad of a situation as it has been you going out on the field on Sundays in the Jets uniform. You might want to think about that. Just friendly words of advice. That's all I want to say about that.
Aaron Rodgers doesn't have a platform every day like Stephen A. Smith, but people actually do real legitimately care what Aaron Rodgers has to say, whether they like him or not. Anyway, TJ, your thoughts here.
Yeah, that's the second time I've listened to it. The first time it sounded to me like Stephen A. might jump in on this, as though he was the big brother protecting him. I didn't think it sounded like that the second time here. It sounded to me like, hey, I've sparred with Ryan Clark, but I got a platform to do it every day. You don't. You can't win. It was more of the media's got more power than you do. It's a Stephen A. delusion, obviously, because the only reason anybody's talking about Ryan Clark at all right now is because of Aaron Rodgers. That's it. Aaron Rodgers has a Netflix series about him right now. Everything Aaron Rodgers does is more interesting than anything Ryan Clark has ever done. What is Stephen A. talking about? I can't name something that Ryan Clark has done that's been interesting. This is why I say he knows football, but does he have interesting opinions? Is Ryan Clark funny? Is he entertaining? What does he do to make news besides get into altercations with people who are more interesting, such as Donald Trump? He said the thing about Donald Trump, and that was his news. His apology was more news than him saying he would respect him. He's just, again, Ryan Clark could sit up there all day with the ESPN platform, and still nobody cares. I don't know what else to say about it.
There's a clip. And I should have gotten this earlier today, but there's a clip of Ryan Clark talking about Travis Hunter's girlfriend. And it's another one of these over-dramatized, they show his sidekicks and their expressions. And I should have asked for it because I did want your clip. I want to see if we can try to sneak it in here, if someone can hunt it down. Man, I can't. I just saw it this morning.
I'll look for it if you want to keep talking.
Well. Anyway, Ryan Clark's entire shtick is built off of race baiting, and ESPN has a little racial conflict and racial war going on that they can't seem to manage. It's not a recipe for success. These things are going to keep bubbling and bubbling and bubbling. And again, ESPN is really poorly managed at this point. Most companies are poorly managed as it relates to dealing with this racial issue because the leadership, generally speaking, is white, and they're afraid to step in and say, hey, guys, here's how we're going to do this racial thing, or here's who is going to talk about it here, who's not going to play. It's not your role. And so basically guys like Ryan Clark, Stephen A. Smith, they have free reign to say and do whatever they want and smear white people in any way that they want, and no one can say anything to them. And then if you have black leadership, they think the same thing as what they're supposed to think in those positions. They're leftists, they're race baiters, they got the victim mentality. And so I do think, as it relates to white athletes, ESPN is really flirting with danger by letting this conflict between Stephen A. Smith and Pat McAfee continue. Stephen A. is going to eventually, could potentially, and again, he's already signed it, or he's about to do this new deal with ESPN, and so maybe he feels untouchable. But at some point, this thing's going to spin so far out of control, the racial conflict, that someone at ESPN is going to have to make a decision. We're going to roll with Pat McAfee, or we're going to roll with Stephen A. Smith. And who knows, Aaron Rodgers doesn't have the popularity at the moment to perhaps win an overall feud, but there's going to be some white athlete that does have the popularity and is successful enough. Again, I can sit here and think if somehow Stephen A. and Ryan Clark pick a fight with Josh Allen, someone who's having a lot of success and who has previously been smeared by ESPN and perhaps has some leftover residue from that, that's going to blow up in ESPN's face. It's already, after the events on November 5th, but once the inauguration in January 20th, and we get deeper and deeper into this MAGA world and this post-Black Lives Matter, post-George Floyd world that we're living in, there is some risk here for Stephen A. Smith and the whole racial idolaters on that side, that Stephen A. could put himself in a position where ESPN has to make a choice between himself and Pat McAfee, and if they'll just go to the data, and that's going to favor Pat McAfee. Let's be honest, the insurance model is broken. Crowd Health puts your health care back in your hands. Use the promo code FEARLESS at joincrowdhealth.com. That's joincrowdhealth.com, promo code FEARLESS. As popular as Stephen A. Smith thinks he is, it's not an organic popularity. It's a forced popularity.
You said he has no base. He has no base.
Yeah, he doesn't have
That's right.
a passionate fan base. Take a Dave Portnoy and Barstool. They got a fan base that they will attack people that go after Dave Portnoy because they like Dave Portnoy that much. Pat McAfee has that same thing. Stephen A. Smith has no base. He has an audience that ESPN has given him through repetition, but people that are ride or die with Stephen A. Smith does not exist, even among these celebrities that that's my brother. Because we've all lived long enough to remember when Skip Bayless was his brother. And then things got rough for Skip Bayless, and Stephen A. dusted him. Same thing would happen between he and Shannon Sharpe. If something business-wise falls out, Shannon Sharpe ain't his brother no more. And Ryan Clark's not his brother anymore. Stephen A. has no base. He should be careful here, tread a bit more lightly. TJ?
Yeah, so your point about go to the data is so obvious, and they're also, Stephen A. knows all of this. That's why, one, he's making the pivot, and he backed off. If you look, sometime in the last 4 or 5 months, he backed off his criticism of Aaron Rodgers and his vaccine stance after being very critical of him previously, like everyone else. This is why he's making this podcast and trying to get some internet audience, because at some point soon, very soon, and we've already seen it used to be 100 million cable subscribers. We're down in the 75 million range, something like that now. At some point, and that point is coming very, very soon, these streaming audiences are taking over, and guys have to be able to do what Pat McAfee has done. Pat McAfee has already proven that he can do it. Pull up the Pat McAfee show on YouTube at any given time, and you'll see 50 to 75,000 people watching in that moment. This guy owns the internet. Stephen A. does not own the internet, and he's frustrated about it. You can tell. ESPN is not stupid. Their golden goose here is Pat McAfee, and he's young. I actually think Stephen A.'s expiration date is coming up sooner than later.
I agree with that. Don't you think ESPN's allowing this to string along? They're deleveraging Stephen A. Smith. I think they're quietly in favor of this feud, and as unintelligent as I think they've been throughout the years, I think this is a plot that they don't mind playing out in front of us. They like this. It's devaluing Stephen A.'s control over ESPN.
I don't know. I think they're about to give Stephen A. or have given Stephen A. this new contract extension. I think they're pretty locked in with Stephen A. for the next.
That contract still doesn't take away some of his leverage. They might pay for that, but I don't think the control that he's kind of had over ESPN will remain.
That may be true. And you know, whether or not that's coming from Jimmy Pitaro or Bob Iger on down, or if there are mid-level executives or executives that are, hey, let's let this play out. Stephen A. is going to step on his junk, and let's let him go ahead and do it because he's too entitled, he's too ungrateful, he's full of himself, and he's not recognizing that we did this, Stephen A. We kept you on TV. We forced you down people's throats. We made you who you are. You haven't broken a story. You don't provide any kind of real insight. You don't have a base. I mean, again, he has an audience, but he doesn't have a base. There's no one sitting out there. He just doesn't have a fan base, and Pat McAfee does. Others do. He doesn't.
Butter.
Very fascinating. If you enjoyed that video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss a moment of Fearless.